So the COVID lab leak theory has been on the news quite a bit for the last couple of days, and there's multiple sources of information about that. A lot of good YouTubers having some information about it. Nate the lawyer has a pretty interesting looking one, but I kind of respect Dr. John Campbell for anything COVID related. So I'm taking a look at his video today. Let's take a look.
Warm welcome to today's talk. It's Saturday, the 11th of March. Now, there's been some pretty interesting developments in the lab leak hypothesis, which is slightly more than a hypothesis now, I think. It's very encouraging that all of the American Senate and all of the American House of Representatives, 100% of all the senators and all the congressmen in the states voted for the president to sign a bill for the intelligence services to release all the information they have on the Wuhan lab leak.
So I haven't been keeping up with this. I kind of knew, like, all I know so far is that we all suspected it. It's kind of like Jon Stewart's thing, right? It's like there's a Wuhan coronavirus research lab right there. And are we really going to believe that it was like a bat soup or pangolins? So, and the actions that the Chinese government has taken since has made things just even more suspicious, right? So, not basically along many months after the release of COVID from wherever, uh, you know, the the Chinese government allowed inspectors in to tour the Wuhan, you know, immunology lab facility. But like it was way too long after, and you can imagine that everything has been sanitized. It's not like the Chinese government would let anyone in until they were good and ready. And whoever the inspectors were, they didn't really take a look at much. But I think, it was more of a formality because they already knew that anything that would have been there would have been kind of sanitized already. But maybe there's some more documentation. Who knows? So let's take a look.
Looking at that in a minute. We'll also be looking at the somewhat disappointing response of the British government, although there are some courageous MPs that we'll talk about. But we're going to start off with something from an Oxford professor who's got pretty good insight into the publishing. I won't use the word racket. That's the disappointing state of publishing, of medical and scientific publishing, that's occurred over the past few years. Here's the poster for today, Barriers to Transparency. And that's the barrier, and I think they might well be found to be unwelcome. As always, posters are available for free download. I'll post the link with the textbooks completely free. I just kind of like the idea of people having these posters on their bedroom walls around about the world for some reason, because I think they do send a message, which is important. Now, straight down to business. This is Professor Anton van der Meer, Professor of Molecular Immunology at Oxford University, as we said. Wuhan researchers were importing back coronaviruses. Yep, they were. Very similar ones to the ones from the pandemic, but not the same. Had applied for grants to increase their infectiousness. In other words, gain of function research. So it looks increasingly probable that there was gain of function research going on. I can't say.
So that much we knew. I mean, we knew that there was gain of function research going on, and it was going on there. The question was, what evidence do we have that it was from that lab that leaked, that the virus was released? So that's the thing. Like, there's scientific basis to make some judgments on that. I know Brett Weinstein has made some comments very early on, spoken a Joe Rogan show, some characteristics of the coronavirus that makes it very suspicious that it appears things that make it appear that it came from a lab environment, such as its weakness to sunlight, right? Which seems to be consistent with something that was released from a lab, um, rather than natural evolution. Also, how the delay of symptoms and that kind of stuff, all these all these things that would make sense if like all these things as if it was engineered kind of thing. So
Definitively, because that's not what the professor says, but that's it's certainly applied for these licenses. Now, he talked about the false impressions given in journals. This one here is from The Lancet that we've looked at a couple of times. This article in The Lancet said, "We stand together to strongly condemn conspiracy theories suggesting that COVID-19 does not have a natural origin. This is inexcusable." That
yeah, like why would they say that? How could you justify it? Like as scientists, if you're going to make that claim, you better have something to back it up. But nobody did.
this was published in a scientific journal. Now, this is not me. Well, I'm saying this, of course, but Bob Seeley, member of Parliament for Isle of Wight in the UK. It's pathetic. I like his language. I like non-political language. I know what he means. It's pathetic, and it is pathetic. You have this unholy, unethical alliance of scientists working together through highly influential publications, effectively to kibosh what may be a scientific truth. I agree. It is completely outrageous. The way that the scientific journals have let us down, in this case, The Lancet. I mean, before this started, The Lancet was just beyond reproach, and then it publishes this stuff. And, myself and Bob Seeley aren't happy. And I'm sure you're not either. And get it pushed into the realms of conspiracy theory, which it was. Facebook banned any posts for ages relating to this.
Yeah, there are some terrible studies that came from the Lancet for all sorts of things. The studies regarding ivermectin being another one. I remember being spectacularly awful.
We need to be asking tough questions about the origins, otherwise who knows what virus will be released next. I just hate to think, but I agree with him. Through incompetence and ambition, how many more millions might be killed? Incompetence and ambition.
That's the thing. If you let them get away with this time, they're just going to do it again. And we've already heard sort of companies like Pfizer basically have dollar signs on their eyes and sort of seeing an opportunity, right? That the Pfizer employee bragging about how they're looking into further mutations so that they can sell more products that addresses that new mutation, which is sounds completely crazy. But knowing what large corporations will do for profits, they'll do literally anything. So it's not such a crazy thing.
So we've got these sort of vain scientists, somewhat. I'm resisting using crude terminology. Somewhat infatuated with their own importance, and they're doing these experiments, risking millions of lives, partly for their own ego. Why aren't they regulated? This is why we have governments, to regulate this kind of thing. Anyway, through incompetence and ambition, how many more millions are going to kill? This is all Bob Seeley talking. This is not some political game. We've got to find out where this thing came from. If you've had a virus that suddenly emerged from a few hundred yards from Porton Down, in this country you wouldn't be able to get away with it. He's right. We need to find out where it came from so we can stop the next one. Porton is the biological warfare facility in this country, of course. So if the virus had arisen from a few miles away from Porton, people would say, just a minute, call me stupid, but isn't that just a few miles away from Porton where all these viruses are kept? And yet when it's the Wuhan Institute of Virology, oh no, it's nothing to do with it. It's preposterous. I had another thought myself. What if it was a few miles from Camp Dietrich in Maryland? You know, maybe somewhere between Camp Dietrich and the Moderna factory, for example, in Maryland. I think the Moderna factory's in Maryland. If this had just popped up a few miles from Camp Dietrich, it's pure coincidence as a few miles from Camp Dietrich. People would be all over the American government like a rash if this happened. Anyway.
And also in Canada, the main national immunology lab in Canada, where a couple of Chinese researchers were proven to have leaked information back to China, and they were quietly fired, and investigations as to why was suppressed afterwards.
It didn't. It popped up a few miles from the Wuhan Institute of Virology in China. Professor of molecular biology again goes on. I've got quite a few quotes in this because I don't want to get it wrong. The conflict arises from the fact that researchers platform and want to continue to perform precisely the sorts of experiments that make a lab leak much more likely. So the very things that make a lab leak likely are what they're doing. These gain of function experiments, and they are experiments, where they investigate whether they can enable by genetic modification an animal virus to infect a human cell. So they say to this virus, come on, infect this human cell for me, will you please? Let me just tinker around with your genetics. Right, now go and try again. Infect this human cell. I mean, I might start a pandemic, but you know, I want to get a publication. I want promotion in my university. It's just a disgrace. It is agreed that this could help us identify potentially dangerous organisms in the wild and so prevent pandemics. This seems unlikely. So this professor here is Professor Vandermeer saying, Oxford University, saying, look, this idea that you have to do gain-of-function research to prevent human pandemics is a load of tosh, basically, if I can paraphrase the professor. It seems unlikely. What is more likely is that these organisms will infect those doing the experiments who could unwittingly spread the virus to the community and possibly the whole world, which of course has happened, or may well have happened. Little justification for doing such experiments except for scientific curiosity, which is excellent in its place, but not when it risks the whole population, and desire for prestige, which is just completely outrageous. So that was the first part of this new discussion. Now, the next bit is the US position. Very interesting. So all of Senate and all of Congress have voted unanimously. Can President Biden ignore the will of all of the congressmen? And
No, I was actually surprised by that one. I figured that Democrats would oppose it, but they haven't. I mean, they tried to get their 2 cents in during the discussion and try to make this a partisan sort of issue, but in the end, basically, it's just everybody voted yeah. The problem being that, look, the U.S. government has regulations against doing this kind of gain of function research. That's why they didn't do it themselves in their own labs. That's why they are funding it in foreign labs. And that's how it became an embarrassment for Fauci, right? That whether we see proof that this was released from the Wuhan lab or not, it is still a massive point of concern that Fauci, as being the man in charge, funded these kinds of things. Very dangerous things that, you know, on its face doesn't have that much value, and very high risk. Anyway.
all of the senators and veto this. I don't know what the American Constitution is. I don't think he can actually if it's a 2/3 majority. Do let me know if you know about American constitutional affairs. I'm not that familiar with it. But they've all voted, 100% of them. Republicans, Democrats, 100% across the board, have voted for this intelligence to be released. So it has to be released. I can't really see any way around this. Um, so
The question is, when it gets released, how redacted is it going to be?
I think the cases will be proved soon. So, Senate passed it last week. House of Representatives voted Republicans and Democrats 419 to 0. Has that ever happened before in the history of the House? Certainly, no time I can remember. Completely unanimous, and in Senate as well. They want to know. We want to know. The public has to know. We need to prevent the next pandemic. Requiring the Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines at the moment, to declassify all intelligence that includes activities performed by the Wuhan Institute of Virology or on behalf of the People's Liberation Army, so military implications. What do the American intelligence services know? We don't know, but my guess is quite a bit. My guess is they know quite a bit. Coronavirus research or other related activities performed at the Wuhan Institute of Virology and workers who got sick. Basically, they want to know everything that is known. Now, from when President Biden signs this declaration, he does sign it, and we assume he will pretty soon, they've got 90 days to get their act together. Department of Energy and FBI, of course, have both come out and said it's the most probable scenario. House Permanent Select Intelligence Committee Chairman Mike.
Right, and it was kind of weird how Democrats are fighting so hard on it. Like when Department of Energy and the FBI said that the release from the lab was the likely scenario. Um, Democrats and their allies, MSM, the entertainment industry, they've come out in full force and they were trying to fight that as much as they can, right? They were saying, it's like, well, they're what they determined was a low confidence. Like, what does the Department of Energy have to do with immunology and all this crap that they like threw out? But in the end, they voted unanimously to release the documents. That either means that the information has already been sanitized, or maybe they all want to know. I'm not sure.
Mike Turner. The American public deserve answers to every aspect of the COVID-19 pandemic. Absolutely, Mr. Turner, we agree completely, including how this virus was created and specifically whether it was a natural occurrence or whether it was either a lab leak related, a lab related event. We want to know. Dr. Robert Redfield, you might remember we talked about Robert Redfield quite a bit in 2020, maybe 2021. Former director of the CDC. I still believe today that the data indicates that the outbreak of COVID-19 was more likely the result of a lab leak than as a result of a natural spillover event. And of course, Dr. Redfield had access to a lot of information that the rest of us didn't. So that was Dr. Robert Redfield, former director of the CDC.
So, part of the reason why it's so unlikely that it came from a natural evolution is that viruses that are that infectious on humans that came from an animal origin is exceedingly rare. Like I mean, they exist, but it's not something that you would expect.
Um, Representative Greg Murphy in the House believed Dr. Anthony Fauci knew it came from a lab and tried to cover it up. Wow, this is a quote from from Mr. Greg Murphy. He might be a doctor, I don't know, but he's a congressman. In January 2020, Dr. Fauci received emails that promulgated that COVID-19 looked engineered and not from the wild. Wow. This is from Mr. Murphy. Yet 3 weeks later, to save his own skin, he commissioned a scientific paper which debunked the lab theory. I have no way of knowing that. I'm just quoting what Mr. Murphy says.
Yeah, like Fauci commissioned his own paper regarding this, and that was the conclusion. Um, Seems like a conflict of interest, but Hey,
He was academically and intellectually dishonest, which is not what we want. We don't want any of these, not at all, because they are unwelcome. The truth is that Dr. Fauci and his institution funneled hundreds of thousands of dollars of taxpayer money to promote dangerous gain-of-function research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology without proper guardrails. Oh dear. So that's what Mr. Murphy has said. Wow. And presumably the American intelligence data will confirm this one way or the other. What was conspiracy theory is now looking like it may be fact.
and all of this is tied together, right? Because you know, a lot of this stuff you couldn't even speculate. Like if several months ago, a year ago, if you wanted to speculate about the Wuhan immunology, I forget the name of the lab, right? The Wuhan lab. If you speculated that it was released from there, that you'd be heavily suppressed, probably have your post suspended, probably possibly have your account suspended in various platforms. Um, there's so many things that we couldn't talk about that we seemingly can now, which is why the censorship through big tech is such a big deal. Like the Twitter files have been massive because um, it doesn't matter what topic it is. It could be this lab leak theory stuff, it could be other things. Um, the ability for us to freely talk about it and express it in the major public sort of areas of discussion, that underpins it all.
We wouldn't expect congressmen to talk without any basis in evidence, would we?
Well, I don't know if I agree with that.
Republican Representative, Jim Hines. I think he might be Democrat actually, but anyway, Representative Jim Hines in the Congress again. He's not so sure about this. There's not one iota of evidence for any of that, but he still wants the evidence released. But this is Mr. Jim Hines, Congressman. At every juncture, the People's Republic of China government has obfuscated and obstructed legitimate inquiry investigation into the origin of the disease. I'm afraid that appears to be true.
I mean, did we seriously expect the government of China to just open its doors to the Wuhan lab right away and just let people investigate fully? No. Whatever happened, they were going to clean it up. Even if it didn't leak from the lab, they would have combed through the lab and basically cleaned up everything, updated their procedures, gotten rid of any embarrassing evidence, even stuff that's not related to COVID. Remember how earlier I mentioned that there were some strains of other diseases that were leaked to China from the Canadian Immunology Lab? Like, this is a lab it would have been leaked to. And, well, one of them anyway. And presumably, anything would want to clean up before they let anybody else take a peek at it.
China's approach has been deeply irresponsible and dangerous to global public health. I'm afraid that is also.
And to be fair, that would have been the same approach that USA would have taken or any other country would have taken, most likely. Uh, cover your butt is a universal principle everywhere.
So, on the balance of probabilities, the reflects the actuality of the situation. Sad to say. These are political statements, not by me, in this case by a politician, Mr. Jim Hines. Now, Matt Hancock, of course, our colourful former Secretary of State for Health. I won't say disgrace. Some might say disgrace. I would say colourful. He's painted himself with a lot of that colour going on celebrity programs and things, really quite undignified in the view of many. But anyway, asked to remove passages from Pandemic Diaries. That's his book. So he wrote this book. Now, to his credit, it looks like, of course, we don't know because it's been redacted from the book. But it looks like Mr. Hancock had written passages in the book saying this virus could have come from a laboratory leak in China. Or he may have said, I've got definitive evidence that it came from a laboratory leak in China. We don't know because it's been redacted. We don't know. I'd like to know what that said, actually, but riffraff like you and me aren't allowed to know in my country, in England's green and pleasant land and Scotland's rolling hills. And
Wait, if it's not just a government document, if it's actually a published book, how could you possibly not have access to the original in this climate of internet keeps a record of everything? I don't get that.
Wales and Northern
Maybe it wasn't like a publicly published book. It is like a internally commissioned book.
Ireland, we're not allowed to know this, which of course is, in my view, shows contempt for the thinking classes, such as you and hopefully me, who are able to process this information in a meaningful way, but you can't know. Secret, redacted, crossed out. All we can say is it questioned the official Chinese version. So quite what did Mr. Hancock write in his book? We don't know. Was it a slam dunk? Was it a maybe if, depending? We don't know. We're not allowed to know. We're not allowed.
No, he didn't have anything definitive because, it's like how could you? Like you would need basically you would need physical access to the Wuhan lab. And that nobody had until months and months after COVID hit.
Allowed to know. So he had his book. Signed off by Simon Case, Cabinet Secretary. Letter confirming compliance with the Radcliffe rules. Dear Matt, I'm writing to confirm your compliance with the Radcliffe rules regarding your forthcoming memoir, Pandemic Diaries. Thank you for your cooperation throughout this process. Good old Matt, eh? Cooperated with the process. That's cooperated with the process of redacting this information so you and me can't know. Now, I'm not saying Matt Hancock had any leeway in this. He would be... Basically, you don't argue with the Cabinet Office. That is the power of the state behind it. And if they say jump, you jump. So don't blame Mr. Hancock in any way for this. But so unfortunate that the Cabinet Office chose to take this opaque option, keeping us in ignorance when I want to be informed. So this is Mr. Simon Case, Cabinet Secretary, Oxbridge man, of course. Concerned they will not there's anything wrong with that. It's just kind of almost a stereotypical way to see some senior ranks in the UK. Concerned they would cause problems. Well, yeah. So in other words, look. You might have the truth, Matt, but we don't want any trouble, so shut up, will you? Just cross it.
It doesn't make any sense to me. Like this is a problem with ends justifying the means, or like a heavily utilitarian mode of thinking. It might cause some damage. Oh, it might cause some, discomfort, or it might erode, this, or it might cause some things that are not safe. Therefore, we're going to throw out all principles and do this thing, which is, a bad thing in principle. Like, we're going to keep things from the public so that, because we determined that it could be damaging to the public. Of course, nobody will ever be able to scrutinize it because, nobody will be allowed to know about it. So none of us will get to determine whether it would be damaging to us or not. We just have to trust somebody else. That doesn't sit well with me.
It out. Don't rip out those pages. Don't let the riffraff know I find this infuriating, actually, patronising. Could damage national security. Don't think so. I mean, what is the point of having a country if you can't challenge a narrative from another country? It's just we need to know the truth here. We just want the truth. The Cabinet Office position before this was entirely coincidence.
If this is a way that we are, if this is an acceptable way of operating, like you can apply this to anything else, literally, right? Okay, so what really did happen in Ukraine with Russia, and what really did happen in the Maidan Revolution? What really is a history of the Azov Battalion and their, their consideration of the ultranationalists in history and recently as well, but certainly like the known problematic ones from recent history, like Stefan Bandera. What, are we going to redact the fact that there are people celebrating this guy that caused genocide of Polish population and also, was instrumental in a genocidal event against the Jews, um, because releasing could damage national security elsewhere? Like, what else are they using this line of reasoning? What else are they hiding from us?
Incidental that the lab that it was close to a Chinese government laboratory. As I say, if it had been close to Fort Detrick or close to Porton Down, would we have happily written it off as such a coincidence? Don't think so. Spokesman for our Prime Minister. The UK wants to see a robust, transparent and science-led review, believing all possibilities remain on the table until that is concluded. Sounds good, but then the caveat, if evidence is presented by the World Health Organization.
Right, because World Health Organization is completely just, they're completely spineless when it comes to China. It was the WHO's officials that went to investigate the Wuhan lab. They literally did nothing to investigate. They just had the walking tour put on by the official Chinese officials, and that was about it.
Don't hold your breath on that one, Mr. Sunak. Do not hold your breath waiting for the WHO to do something profound on this, because you'll turn blue. So there we go. It looks like American intelligence is going to be released in the next few months. Then we'll have something definitive. Senior academics in this country know things, it would appear. Matt Hancock knows things, but he's muzzled.
Yeah, but I don't know. Like earlier, I mentioned that China had many months to sanitize their data. Like, I don't know why the US bureaucrats would not sanitize their data either. I know that if they're caught doing that, that's a significant risk on themselves. But at the same time, they're powerful people willing to protect them doing that kind of thing. So I don't have that many expectations of what's going to come out of this.
Pity. So what could happen immediately? Could I call on the Cabinet Office? In fact, yeah, I'll do this. I call on the Cabinet Office to allow Mr. Hancock to write an appendices for his book containing the redacted passages on the lab leak theory. Just get your pen out, sign it just the way you signed that letter, and let us know. Thank you.
All right. That's cool. Now let's take a look at what the White House response is. It's going to be interesting.
Sign the legislation that would
It's going to be interesting or real dumb.
declassify information about the
Or both.
origins of COVID.
So look, I know that it was just passed, if I remember correctly, it was just passed out of the House today, right? So we're taking a look at the bill. We have continued to share information, as I've mentioned many times before, with members of Congress. And as you know, the first few months of the president's administration, he came into office. He directed the intelligence community to declassify information, assessing COVID origins, and to make that report public to Americans.
So why don't we have it already then? Why don't we have it?
To the American people, because we know and he understands how important it is to get to the bottom of COVID origins. We will continue to
Oranges.
use every tool to figure out what happened here. While also protecting classified information. Again, we're going to take a look at the bill. I just don't have anything to share on how we're going to move forward at this time.
Okay, so basically, a a big fancy no comment.
Passed it unanimously. So why would President Biden not something that
We're
literally
gonna-
got no opposition and
I
comment?
totally understand. It is the right of the President of the United States to look at the legislation that is going to be coming before him, and we'll have more to share.
Yeah, so we don't know what Biden's going to do with it. Apparently, like she tossed out this idea that he's committed to transparency and he's already declassified this information for the public or something to that effect. And it's like, what? No, he hasn't. Because we don't, you know how we know? Because we don't have that information. This bill didn't even need to pass if we already had that information. So,
Clarification request on what he said earlier.
Guys, so this is
yeah, okay. That was completely worthless from the White House. Corinne Jean-Pierre never disappointing when it comes to giving no useful information. So, all right. Looks like that's about it. All we can do is just sort of hang on and take a look at what they come out with. Again, I don't have much expectations of what they're gonna come up with. I think looking at the characteristics of the virus itself and how it fits within evolutionary biology, I think people like Brett Weinstein is eminently, informative about this stuff. Um, that um, I think their analysis almost carries more weight than anything that we're going to see in some official document somewhere because documents can be redacted, they can be fabricated, they can be hidden, destroyed, whatever, right? So, anyway, we'll take a look at what happens.